Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Alphabetical Fugazi, the only podcast that devotes an episode each to discussing every song in the Fugazi catalog, from Fuga A to Fugazi. I'm your host, Ian James Wright, and joining me today to discuss Cashout from the 2001 album The Argument is my friend and sometime musical collaborator, Jay Underwood. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thanks, Ian. It's good to talk to you, and I like talking to you when you use your middle name. That makes it feel more official.
There are like 3 famous people named Ian Wright, so if I don't throw in that middle name, like I don't know, if it's all about SEO these days, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we had in college, we had an originals band, not to mention an award-winning White Stripes cover band.
1 gig, 1 award.
Yeah, that's batting 1,000. So
quit while we were ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we also played in a Weezer band that same night.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you just brought that up, and I want to point out that the White Stripes cover band was just me and you.
Right.
And I played drums and you played guitar.
Right.
And neither one of those instruments was our normal instrument at the time. And so it felt extra sweet to win that contest. We really took down that gift certificate to the record store, I think it was our prize. Yeah, I think I worked at that record store too, so I got even a discount off of the normal price, which made it even sweeter.
Yeah, that's sweet victory right there. Do you want to go back to the beginning in terms of Fugazi? Do you remember your early days hearing about them, listening to them for the first time? What's your Fugazi story, Jay?
Yeah. So I grew up, I moved from Richmond up to a town called Fredericksburg when I was in middle school. And I remember the summer that I moved to Fredericksburg, I moved right after the school year was over. So there was like 3 months or something where I didn't have know anybody. We were living in my grandparents' house while our house was being figured out. And I found this old Yamaha acoustic guitar in the basement and decided that I was going to learn how to play guitar during that summer. And I remember it was a really bad guitar, and it was really hard to play. Like, I don't think the strings had been changed ever. And it was, an ancient guitar. And I remember talking to my dad and trying to negotiate a deal that if I kept up with the lessons for 3 or 4 months, that he would, subsidize part of a new guitar. And so in the quest for this new guitar, I ended up going to like the only guitar shop in Fredericksburg. I think there was a couple at the time, but there was like the Cool Guitar Shop and the other guitar shop. And so of course I went to the Cool Guitar Shop, and that's where I met a lot of the people that ended up kind of taking me on the musical journey that ended up being growing up in the Virginia. Fredericksburg's interesting because if you talk to the rednecks, it's not quite legit. It's not the real hills. And if you talk to the city people, it's not the suburbs either. So we're in this no man's land of DC suburbs.
Yeah, I remember, I grew up in the DC suburbs, and kind of nobody there. My metric was always nobody there said y'all. When you start to get it down around Fredericksburg or Richmond, y'all starts creeping into people's vocabularies. So, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it was definitely a gray area, and I don't mean Civil War. Actually, I do mean Civil War. It definitely was a gray area. What am I talking about? So yeah, no, I grew up in that area, and there was, was playing guitar and just, a sponge for music at the time. And it's weird because I feel like even though it was, the mid 90s, maybe the early 90s at that point, the, music was still really regionalized. Like you'd hear of bands, but there was no internet really. So there was no really easy way to access bands from around the world. It was basically kind of like who you could get access to locally, or whose brother would drive you to DC for a show or something like that. So a lot of the music was super regionalized. And, from the first point I can remember, Fugazi was was kind of like the kings of the DC music scene. They were just spoken about with almost like a religious type reverence. Like
right.
They were just the gold standard of what defined, what's good sounding in DC. And so I always had this kind of admiration for them. Even before I even heard their music, I just remember seeing kids in high school that had whiteout on their backpacks that had written Fugazi, because that was basically the only merch you could get from Fugazi, was to make your own.
Right.
And so, people would write Fugazi on their backpack, their JanSport backpacks in whiteout or something like that.
Which inspired one of the lyrics in the band that we were in together, I guess.
Yeah, classic Zach Morrissey lyric of putting whiteout on your JanSport backpack. Yeah, exactly. Nice callback. But yeah, I feel like I was intrigued by them because Fugazi, even the name, clearly it doesn't initially, if you've never heard that word and you've never heard of the band, you don't really know what to make of it. It's not like a set of words or letters you've ever seen in that order. So you are kind of instantly intrigued. And I remember, I think it was the first time I saw them, it was on the National Mall in a tent. And do you remember how they used to have this, it was like a festival, and I forget what the cause was or the reason was for the festival, but I remember going onto the National Mall kind of in front of the Smithsonian and seeing, just walking into this tent. And I still remember Guy playing that Rickenbacker, and the sound wasn't, fantastic, but it didn't really even matter. It was like the energy, there was just it was just like walking into a power plant or something. Energy was being created in this tent. And so you just were kind of taken aback by this whole experience that you were trying to process it in real time. And it was just very difficult to even understand what you were looking at. But there was something just undeniable and super intriguing about it. I think that was the first time I saw them.
I never saw them play in the National Mall, but I think I know about the concert you're referring to.
Yeah, it was. I think you and I only saw them together one time, which was at that University of Richmond show.
Yes, the cold show,
the one that was freezing. Yeah,
that was nuts.
It was. Yeah, I remember standing there. I think it was like the Greek theater or some kind of outdoor theater, and it was so cold. We were just sitting there, standing there trying to survive until they came on. And it seemed like it was an eternity between, the opening band and them. Or was there an opening band? It seemed like we stood there for a long, long time.
I can't even remember.
But it was worth it. I remember they played for, a really long set. I thought they didn't seem to feel the cold the same way we did.
They were still feeling it, though. Do you remember they had to, they messed up one or two songs because it was so cold their fingers were like frozen. They're like, all right, we got to start over again.
Yeah, sometimes I listen now to Fugazi, and I listen to the guitar parts, and I think to myself about that show, like, how the heck did these guys play these parts
right
with like a frozen hand? I can't play them with a perfectly conditioned hand. Yeah,
it's amazing. They're very different kind of guitar players. It's hard to describe. I guess I would say the guitar players that people normally idolize, a relatively experienced player can sort of hear that and still pick it up right away, even if it's difficult to play. Ian and Guy played differently in very creative and interesting ways. So I would say, even if you're pretty experienced, you'd listen to a lot of those songs and be like, what's happening there exactly? It'd take you a while to figure out.
Totally. And I think, I'm trying to think through some other groups in the DC, music scene. And I feel like that kind of, counterintuitive guitar style was a feature of a lot of groups there, and I feel like it all came from Fugazi. I mean, there's probably people that they would point to and say, well, that we were influenced by all these people, but for me, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's almost like you can't obviously see how they came up with that. There's some additive stuff going on and some subtractive stuff going on as well, and that I feel like makes a very unique guitar sound, and it just makes it really interesting to listen to for me as a guitar player.
So as a guitar player, before we jump into talking about this song proper, would you say you were influenced in any ways by Fugazi, or, as a musician, not just a guitar player, but in any way?
I feel like where my direct influences from Fugazi came up would be, I'd be, practicing some ideas or trying to, develop some ideas, and I would stumble upon some kind of riff or some kind of, progression of chords. And I never got into like alternative tunings that much, a little tiny bit, but not as much as some people. And I feel like when I was jamming along and working on songs with myself, I would stumble upon something and be like, oh, that sounds like it has a Fugazi type. Like Fugazi would kind of become an adjective for me.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know. It's like they had claimed an entire part of the musical universe for their sound that no one else really had. And I remember, this is a little bit tangential, but I remember seeing Q and Not You perform right when they kind of started playing, even before they had a record out. And they had the same gift that I thought, there's just that real innovative way of creating sounds and kind of mixing them together, and like a less is more. Like they would get really, energetic, but it wouldn't be because they were just blasting you with like super loud guitars and super high, energy drums. It would be, I think their drummers sometimes played with like a real tiny kit, like just a snare drum and a bass drum or something, and maybe like one or two cymbals. And they could do so much with that. And Fugazi really, to me, drove that whole way of doing music. Like you could basically be punk rock without just being super loud.
Interesting inventive parts adding up to something that is amazing but difficult to understand how it's just, four guys playing.
Yeah, it's almost like they didn't rely on it's like they didn't get lazy. Like I feel like when, you remember this from being in bands, is, you come up with a cool idea and you're like, this is cool, but it's only one idea. We need to fill this out so we can have a whole song. And I feel like sometimes what would happen is, in order to kind of move forward and finish the song, you just kind of put some filler in there, right? And repeat what you have, or you have, the bass and guitar do the same thing or something, right? Where you stop innovating, you kind of just start producing. And whenever I listen to Fugazi, I feel like they never did that. They never got lazy. They never just said, oh, well, let's just do the verse and the chorus one more time. They definitely repeat things, but it doesn't feel like they did it because they were trying to finish the song. And so it's this interesting combination of ingredients that don't feel overly heavy-handed, but also don't feel, low energy, which I think is one of the special things about their sound.
Yeah, well said. I know exactly what you mean. So, talking about Cashout, I talked to you about whether you'd be interested in doing this podcast. You seemed to zero in right away on this song as something you wanted to talk about. So let me give you the first word. Why? What is it that attracts you to this song?
When you started telling me about your podcast, I immediately, like you said, I immediately was like, oh, Cashout, that song's great. Kind of, to me, I know it's one of their much later songs, which usually for people that really follow bands, my guess would be that generally speaking, people who are, diehards actually like the earlier stuff more than the later stuff. Even though I feel like with great bands, you can just appreciate all parts of their catalog. But for me, this song really has a combination of a bunch of different things that I feel like really captures all the things I liked about Fugazi's sound and their lyrics and just the style. And so whenever I'm, jonesing for my Fugazi fix, I often listen to this song because I feel like it gives me a lot. And it has so many little detailed, intricate parts that are very fascinating to me as a listener, but it also has an energy that makes you feel like, you're part of something.
Well, I'm all about the details on this show. You want to call out one of them and let's talk about it.
Yeah. So yeah, totally. So I love, it's great listening on headphones because I feel like you get a lot more of the stereo panning and all the different ways that the recording engineer, and I know you had Don Zentura on the program earlier, and he's like, I listened to your episode, and I just love the way he approaches recording because he's just, first of all, just such a even keel guy. I remember, I'll tell you a quick story I guess I'll tell the listeners because I told you this story many years ago, but you and I always quoted this story that a friend of mine who's an engineer, and I'll leave names out of this to not start some kind of like hip hop style beef.
Right.
But I remember my friend telling me that, he was in this recording session and the engineer was getting frustrated with the band. And
well, wasn't it like he was spent up, if I remember the story correctly, I think you told me he spent like a long time setting up the drum mics, right? He was just like miking the drums in this very intricate way.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you told me that
right.
At some point, I mean, the drummer wasn't in the room, but he sort of like came in there and, went to sit behind the kit and sort of moved the mics out of the way and stuff.
Yeah. That's it. Exactly. The drummer came into the room after this guy had like intricately set up, sits down to the kit and kind of does what drummers do, which is like, fiddle with things a little bit and like move things around. And he like moves a couple of the mic stands, and the engineer comes out and he just, comes out of the booth and he's like furious and he goes, "You just fucked me. You fucked me and you fucked your entire band." And he like storms out of the recording session, which I don't think you could ever imagine Don Zentura. I kind of want to like hear a story. I hope one of your future guests has a story about Don Zentura getting mad about something because I feel like if you made that guy mad, you should feel really bad.
Yeah.
like that's definitely on you.
Yeah. Don seems much mellower than that. He'd probably call you a goof. He'd be like, "You goof. Let me do this again."
Yeah, exactly. My band in high school actually recorded there. Shout out to Kamikaze Escape Plan, Stafford, Virginia. But we had a chance to record there a little demo, like a 3-song demo, and it was probably bad I recorded there in high school because it was so awesome that like everywhere I record for the rest of my life will seem to like pale in comparison, just because I had like Don Zentura recording my band, and he's just such a nice guy, and he's so giving with his wisdom on stuff. And we were just right in that right sweet spot to like not have any clue what we were doing, but really be eager to learn. So I feel like we just learned a lot about how to make good sounding stuff just from watching him. And, he's so giving with his time too. Like he's not sitting there going, "Stop bothering me while I'm recording," or anything like that. He's just a nice guy. I wish there's more guys like that.
Yeah, all of which is by way of saying, like, the production on this and the album in general is great. Yeah, I wrote down the same thing, like the stereo spread. Like, this is a great song to listen to on headphones, especially for guitarists who are interested in discerning which part Guy is playing, which part Ian is playing. They have the guitars panned, and
exactly.
You can really enjoy the sort of dual guitar interplay. You got Ian playing those first like dun 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 dun, and then Guy comes in with this like really sort of like sinewy, snaky part. It's very cool.
Yeah, and speaking of the details, I know I went off on a tangent about the inner ear, but the detail, from the first second of the song, like the first thing you hear is a guitar pan listener left, kind of giving it almost sounds like it's loading up, right? It's like it has this little guitar slide.
Yeah,
and
a
then
little
it
like a
stops.
pick scrape or just like finger noise or something like that.
Exactly. And it's like it kind of gets your ear ready for what you're about to experience. But I like it because they could have just started with just the drum beat that comes in right after that. And the beat's real sparse. It's not like, full on. I always felt like the Fugazi drummer played with such precision. It always sounded like he played with like really thin sticks to me, like almost like pencils or something. If that makes any sense.
I have one of Brendan's sticks. I snatched it off the stage at one of their shows. I think it's just like a normal, what is it, 5A? I know so little about drums.
Yeah,
I don't know what's a normal size drumstick.
I think that's normal. Yeah, 5A. I think it's probably a normal stick, but I felt like he was so good with the dynamics of them that sometimes it feels like he's playing with like a real thin stick, and sometimes it feels like he's really, bashing it.
I really love the little like clicka thing in it. I guess he's like doing little rim hits or something. That part is so cool. If I could play drums, I'd probably just sit there playing that for hours.
Totally. And I actually saw them play at Mac Rock, and I think it was like 2001 or 2002, which was the Mid-Atlantic College Radio Conference at JMU. Did you ever go to that?
No. What did I go to? I went to one in Charlottesville, but I never went to Mac Rock.
That Mac Rock was kind of legendary, at least from what I remember. There was the Fugazi show. That was the only time I've ever seen Fugazi play inside, by the way.
Oh, really?
They played in this gym.
Yeah,
which was very interesting. They had two drummers, so they had Brendan and they had
Jerry,
another guy.
Yeah,
Jerry, exactly. And I think Jerry does all auxiliary percussion on Cashout as well. I know there's about halfway through the song you hear some cabeza come in there. That little, it's like a thing that has a handle on it and a ball bearing kind of beads.
Oh, right. The little...
You kind of rotate it with one hand and hold your hand on the other side.
Yeah, like you do that twisting motion.
It makes
with
this kind of swisher sound. Yeah, exactly. There's a little bit of that in there, it sounds like. And I remember seeing them play with the two drummers, and I think they had two drum kits. It wasn't just like sometimes when people have like when you see Pavement, you have Bob on the side,
a pair of congas or whatever.
Exactly, like standing up and kind of doing the auxiliary percussion like that. But I think when I saw Fugazi at Mac Rock, they had the full double kit, which was really cool. Not just orally, but also visually, it was cool too to see this. The synchronized drumming had kind of a cool visual to it. Coincidentally, that Mac Rock was also the coolest, probably the coolest thing I ever saw musically, which was the power went out at this little venue, and I was seeing this guy Jason Molina, who went under the name Songs Ahaya, and he decided because the power went out, he was going to just take his little pig nose amp and his guitar and go play outside on the stairs, and he played his set on the stairs of the Harrisonburg City Hall. And in front of like, I don't know, there's probably like 60 or 70 of us. And it was like one of the most surreal, kind of haunting, but like beautiful experiences I've ever seen musically.
That's awesome.
That was the same Mac Rock. So that Mac Rock was pretty cool.
That guy passed away like 5 years ago or so, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. It's unfortunate because he's just had a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, I need to dig into his catalog. I never got around to it. I think I saw him at the Charlottesville festival I mentioned previously. I guess he was Magnolia Electric Company was the name he was going by at the time. That's on my list. I'm very tardy in checking him out more.
But back to Cashout, I think that might, like, when you listen to that song, you think, wow, this song is really like it kind of cranks into this really rockin', section. But when you listen to it, it's not like they, rely on a bunch of crazy distortion pedals or like really big drum, recording tricks or like a ton of cymbals. It just has such a good dynamic character to the song that you feel like when they change into that loud part, it's such a good dynamic change that the energy comes with it. Automatically.
And not only that, well, like you're right, it's most of the song is fairly chill by Fugazi standards and very melodic and beautiful. It's one of Ian's, one of his vocal performances where you're like, oh, this guy can sing. He has a really pleasant voice. But yeah, it's also, I think, something that adds to it is something about the nature of the composition. There's a lot of tension in it. It has notes that constantly are sort of like creeping up and down. Yeah, I mean, from the very first, there's that main guitar part. There's like a thing that Joe does in the background. So it's like almost chromatic. These notes are very close together and like going down and up in a way that sort of builds up a lot of tension. So that's something that helps the end explode the way it does.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote, I was thinking about it and I was trying to kind of think through my thoughts on the song, and chromatic was one of the things that I feel like chromatics, walk downs and walk ups and, half step changes in notes they're hard to do really, really well because it has a very particular sound. Like when you start doing a chromatic scale, it's very obvious that you're doing a chromatic scale, and they're able to do it in a way that you don't immediately go, oh, they're just doing like a, chromatic walk down.
And it doesn't feel like tacked on in any kind of way.
Yeah, it's like the anti-arpeggiator.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like that the bass in this song, it goes from, I mean, you're the bass player, but when I listen to the bass line, I could just listen to this bass line like by itself because it's such it's kind of funky even. And it's got that kind of round, it's got that kind of like Ernie Ball bass sound, like that round, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sounds real, I don't know the right word to describe it, but it just has that tone that's kind of funky. And especially when you hear like a bass note comes out by itself.
Yeah. There's a lot of treble character. There's a lot of just this sort of high-end sound to it that sort of stands out from the mix. This is one of those Joe Lally bass lines where he's like incorporating chords and stuff. Like I was listening to it, trying to pick out all the different parts. There are certain parts of the song where you could be fooled thinking that he's like doing one of the guitar parts because he's sort of doing chords or double stops, kind of being in the background, supporting what the two guitars are doing. But he goes into and out of that so seamlessly. It's not like he's like, here's the part of the song where I play chords for a while, and here's the part of the song where I do single note bass line. He integrates it all into one sort of fluid line.
I mean, he's such an interesting bassist that I feel like this song you get an appreciation for that, but it's also, it's like a song that features bass, but it's not a song that if you hadn't heard it more than once, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's the song that's all about the bass, right? There's another song that's all about the bass, I guess.
Yeah, there's another song.
But yeah, the way that, I don't know, when you think through like how they wrote that song, I always think about when I hear a song, I think how did these guys write this song? And a lot of songs you can say, okay, clearly what happened was usually one of the singers had an idea and they came to the band and they said, here's my idea, and they basically played like the guitar and vocals, and then the rest of the band kind of like filled it in, so to speak. And for this song, I can't make that determination so easily. Like I have no idea who did what. It almost feels like everyone is contributing just kind of a unique idea that came together to be a song. It doesn't feel like there's one leader, which I think is such a cool thing about Fugazi songs.
Yeah, from what I understand about the band and the reading I've done, that's pretty much as a rule how they composed. Like nobody would bring in whole songs; they would just sort of bring in parts, and they would jam on that for a while. They'd sort of compose together as it's just sort of like in the practice room, putting these interesting parts together, and sort of putting vocals over it would usually be the very last step that somebody would write the vocals and the lyrics and the melody and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool that I didn't know that was the. I mean, that's exactly what it sounds like, and I could see that. I mean, that sounds really ideal. Like if you wanted to have a band, you could be like, hey, the way we're going to write songs, band, is we're going to all come together and bring our parts, and we're going to put them together and make these awesome songs. I feel like that's like a really good idea. But in practice, like, as you know from being in bands, it's really hard to do it like that. So the fact that they were able to do it like that and have it be something that they followed through their career is actually even more impressive, because can you imagine getting together with 3 other people and saying, we're going to, all chip in? And I mean, it just shows how much they all cared about what they were doing and how much they all trusted each other and respected each other's ideas, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and how much they're on each other's wavelength, and how good they all are as musicians, right? Like that's the sort of setup where if you're playing with a few musicians who are just kind of like hacks or just aren't very creative, you're not going to come up with anything good. It has to be all people who are super into finding interesting things to do and using that to come up with a song that really hangs together well. But it also adds up to a song, like, especially in this case, that is sort of hard to imitate in any other way. So what I mean is, I was looking up on YouTube to see if people had done covers of this song. And I guess I mainly found 2. The band Yuck does a cover that's like very faithful to the original with a couple of cool little tweaks, like mainly like, there's a part where instead of playing, the guitar just sort of drops out and does a kind of like some muted chukka 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 chukka. Just little things like that. There's like an RX Bandits cover that's even more faithful than that one. So, but
really,
but when you think about it, like, try to imagine covering this song and not sort of playing the same parts. It's almost like, what would be the point? Like, the parts they came up with, the music they came up with for the song, it is the song. It's almost like it would be pointless to cover it without doing the parts that Fugazi wrote.
Yeah, it's like, it's such a it's like almost like a poem, like a musical poem that's really specific. So like if you tried to it's like trying to paraphrase a poem. Like, you can't really do that, right?
Yeah, you lose the entire
like, you got to
essence
say
of it.
the words. I mean, I guess you could paraphrase a poem, but they would quickly lose. Yeah, the essence would quickly be taken away.
Well, that's a good segue to talking about the lyrics of this song, I think. I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with me. It seems like a statement about, gentrification.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like when I listened to this song in 2020, it could have been written in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of the interesting things about Fugazi lyrics, is that I feel like there's a timelessness. There's like a timeliness and a timelessness, which is weird, right? Like, how do they write things that are something that are so relevant, but also something that you can listen to 20 years later and be like, yep, that's right. That's truth.
Yeah, this problem definitely did not get solved in the last 20 years or so.
I guess in a perfect world, one day Fugazi songs will seem like they aren't timeless anymore.
The opening lines of this song, I think, stand out a little in at least in the Ian Mackay lyrics of the Fugazi catalog, because Ian's not a lyric writer who usually deals in specifics. He sort of has general things to say in his lyrics. On this one, on the other hand, he sort of sets the scene. He's like, on the morning of the first eviction, he locates us in sort of a time and a place. furniture's out on the sidewalk next to the family. Like, he's painting a little picture there, and that's not something he tended to do prior to this that often. And it's really nice to see that side of him as a writer.
Yeah, and honestly, before I really got into Fugazi, I didn't understand a lot of their lyrics. Like, I couldn't discern them. And so I think one of the appeals of this song to me is, apart from what you said earlier, that, you know, you can actually hear how good of a singer Ian MacKaye is. It's kind of like you get more of a crisp understanding of the lyrics right away.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way into kind of setting the storytelling, you know, mood of the song, because you're not trying to discern things.
It's probably a really good trick for writing about a problem like this, which is a kind of problem that, what do I want to say here? It's like an emergent property, an emergent problem with capitalism. So like an emergent, to my understanding, an emergent property of something is like you couldn't predict how it would work in a system by observing a small part of it, right? Like, you could study droplets of water and understand what water is, but you couldn't take that knowledge and extrapolate that and understand how an ocean behaves and like the tides and stuff like that. Like, that's only something that becomes apparent when you observe that small thing in a huge system. And it's like that is sort of what's happening here with the problem of, you know, gentrification and where people are able to live. Because if you think of it in small chunks, like the very basic propositions of capitalism without any regulation, they sound really reasonable, right? It's like, yeah, I should be able to get as much money for my rental property as I can at any given moment, right? Like, if people are going to pay me a certain amount, it's crazy to like not accept that amount and have those people rent my property. Or even like from the other side, as a member of like a gentrifying population, you're like, well, I should be able to live in the best neighborhood that I can reasonably afford. So like why not? It sounds totally reasonable to be able to do that. It sounds impossible to argue against in any way. Like, why should people not be able to do that? But like the whole thing, when you put it into a system and set it in motion without any kind of safeguards, it naturally results in stuff like mass evictions that are sort of turn out to be racist also. So it's like, it's so difficult politically to explain this to somebody who's not aware of it as a problem. There's no headline there's no soundbite that can quickly explain why it's a problem. It's so nuanced. Arguments where one side can dumb it down to the simplest thing possible, like, we should be free to do whatever we want with our money. That's the side that usually wins in a political argument, and you know, that's the side in this equation where, you know, the gentrifiers, the developers, and capitalism wins because it's so easy to make the case for that in a non-nuanced way. So therefore, to write a song like this and present a sympathetic like character as a family, that's a smart way to go about writing a song like this. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it always this kind of theme always makes me think, because I look at things being built and things being developed, and you know, the way we're treating our natural resources and things like that, and our human resources as a civilization. And I always think about this really this makes me think it's like a really transactional thing for people. Like, you know, you build a place and you sell the place and then you're done, or whatever, from the developer's perspective. And I get the allure of that, but I feel like that lack of kind of longer term vision is one of the issues, right? Like, if you can, and that's kind of, I think, part of the theme of this song is that, you know, the cash out part, the title of the song is that, you know, you're just trying to kind of get in and get out and, you know, extract something. And I think that mentality, if everyone takes that mentality, you're in for a big problem if everyone's just trying to extract something from their fellow man. And I feel like that Fugazi's is so good
at making you think when you listen to their music, but also, I feel like it's not something that hits you over the head so bluntly that you feel like you have to fully buy into everything they say the first time you hear it, or else you're not doing it right. I think they do a good job of making it thought provoking and accessible for people like me that like to ponder about stuff like this.
I think the one line about, also in the beginning, the landlord and his son, that's an interesting line to throw in there. It's not just the landlord, right? He wants to include the landlord and his son in the lyrics, but just as a way of also pointing out that, yeah, it's not like that's another aspect of, it's rational. It seems rational for people to, charge what they can charge, get the money they can in the system that we have, which is pretty much prizes getting money in any way possible. But it also shows how wealth tends to accrue within classes, right? Because it's not just the landlord. He's going to be handing down the privilege, the money, the power to his son. And that's what results in, often it's not the hardworking American dream types who really end up having the power in society. Often it's just, some dope who has a rich daddy and inherited his wealth. So that's just another one of those emergent problems, just ending up with a bunch of those people in the seats of power.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think those are interesting little details. I also like the detail about this little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed home reference in there. And, because when I have a little kid, and so do you. And so I always think about that nursery rhyme because when you get to the roast beef part, I'm like, do we really want to propagate the roast beef to the next generation? And then I sometimes think about this song, like, I wonder what Ian MacKaye, when he does, because clearly he knows this nursery rhyme because he has it in his song. So I wonder what he would put instead of roast beef. If you ever get him on here, tell him that Jay wants to know what I should be doing instead of roast beef, because I'm pretty sure I'll like his idea better.
I'll write that down.
These are the things that these are the big questions we have to answer.
One of my other favorite lines is, he says, "The elected are such willing partners. Look who's buying all the tickets to the game." Makes me think of, so one of my favorite podcasts is called Roderick on the Line. I don't know if I've mentioned this one to you before, but it's like, basically it's about John Roderick, Seattle indie rock musician, the founding member of the band The Long Winters. But it's hard to describe the podcast. It's just sort of about his...
Was he the guy in Harvey Danger too?
He played bass in Harvey Danger, I'm pretty sure. That's right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Long Winters are really cool as well.
Yeah. So it's a great podcast. He has a very interesting way of looking at the world and talking about it. But like a couple of years ago, he actually ran for Seattle City Council, and so he sort of talks through it in the podcast, episode by episode. So you get to almost witness his process, like what he sees, what he learns, what he understands. And something that he said in the midst of that was really interesting to me, where it's like, we think of people who have influence in politics, like the real estate developers, the owners of large corporations. Like, so often we think of it as, I'll donate to your campaign, so you do what I want, or I can secure you the endorsement of this union, so yeah, you better play ball and give my business something that's useful to it. And that does happen, but what he was saying is, like, the majority of it is really just the access that these people have to the politicians, right? Like, they're at the same dinners, the galas, they're members of the same country club or whatever. So they just become close and they're friends with each other, and like, that's it. Like, like, you're my boy. If I were a politician and I could do something to, like, do a favor for whatever it is, whatever way you make your livelihood, like, I would be biased toward doing that. And like, what he was explaining is that's just the majority of what we think of as corruption. It's not some under the table money deal. It's just the access that people have. and they can buy that access. And I don't even know if it's
I think it's very interesting.
It's as cynical as those people being like, well, I'm going to be a member of this country club because, you know, so-and-so politician is a member of this country club, and, you know, I'm going to weasel my way into his circle. It's like maybe not even as cynical as that. It just happens. Those are the people who have money. Those are the people who have power. They become friends and they look out for each other's interests. And simple as that.
Yeah, and I don't even think sometimes they even think about it like they're looking out for each other's interests. They're kind of just like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, you know, they're trying to be, you know, matchmakers in some degree, right? They're, you know, you're probably a pretty social animal if you want to be a politician because you have to go and be social all the time. So you're probably just saying, hey, you know, I've got a lot of friends that do this. This would be interesting. Oh, you know, what'd be cool. And you're right. I think the access is. I think that's a really interesting perspective because I think you're right. I don't think the maliciousness is probably as big of a problem as the access.
Yeah, and like when you think about it, it's probably is like they're throwing ideas around and they're coming up with things that seem like it would be good for their constituents or the city. It's like, oh, we could build a sports arena here. We could build like this new marketplace or mall here. Like that's great. It would be, you know, it's more jobs, it's, you know, blah, blah, blah. It drives the economy. Sounds good. Like I'm doing a good thing. But the only problem is like the person who's not represented in that conversation is like the person who lives there and is not going to be able to find another place to live once they get eminent domained out of their homes.
Yeah, it is a good, like, it's interesting looking at the, you know, the landscape of the world through like Fugazi lyrics, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of the essence. They're good at capturing the essence of the problem through almost these little anecdotal. Like this is, you know, this song is a lot about development and you know, class division and things like that. And you know, I don't think anybody, you know, I hope people don't like rejoice at the idea of people being kicked out of their, you know, their house. Like that sounds really sad. If there's a team out there that's getting excited about kicking people out of their house, then I think that's the world's sadder than I thought. But I think what happens is, like you said, it's like a consequence that people are willing to deal with because they believe in a system, but as long as the system's kind of working for them, they don't really worry about it too much. And there's enough people the system works for that, you know, keeps it kind of up and running.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in terms of how they present situations. I found this interview with Ian Mackay from 2002. It's this magazine called Verbicide. I'll just read a little snippet of it. I think he's backing up exactly what you're saying. He says, I usually don't write songs that offer up answers because most really perplexing things in the world don't have simple answers or don't have answers at all. And if they do, they have more than one answer, which makes it even more complicated. He says, what I try to do a lot of times is I try to get people to look at situations. I try to express my thoughts about a situation because usually I'm looking at things in a way that I think is different from the way most people look at it. I try to shift the source of light to look at the situation from a different perspective. For instance, on the new record, there's this song called Cashout. A lot of people immediately assume that this is an anti-gentrification song. But if you read the song, it's just saying this is what happens. The issue that I was thinking about in terms of that song is the fact that human beings, as far as I can tell, are actual entities. We exist. And when people are moved out of the places where they've lived their whole lives, because they actually do exist, there is a physical being. They have to exist somewhere. Everyone needs to be somewhere. So where's everybody going to be if it's too expensive to live anywhere? So that's pretty interesting. It's exactly what you were saying. Like he's not giving answers necessarily because maybe there aren't any, but he's just sort of presenting this situation, this problem.
Yeah, he kind of breaks it down to like the physics of what happens, right? And I like that. I mean, I always think about that with, you're a dog guy. I always think about that with places that allow animals, like restaurants that will let the animal sit on the porch or whatever. like there's a certain number of dogs that like make a place really cool. And then there's like one more dog than that, and the place turns into a disaster, right? And it always makes me think about rules like that we set up as a society that like if everyone took advantage of this opportunity, what would society be like? Like if everyone had a dog with them at all times, what would the rules about dogs be? Right? And sometimes I think like a lot of the stuff we do as a society is not because it's a smart way to do it. It's actually just because few enough people try to take advantage of something that it doesn't become the most high priority problem for that particular situation. And I think I like that. I like the song even more now that I hear Ian's interpretation of his own song. And I guess that's probably worth more than my interpretation of his song, but which seems similar anyway. But I feel like I like that he's kind of just trying to get the facts out there, right? Like this is what happens. Now, why it happens, there's a lot of discussion, but you can't deny that this is happening.
Well, speaking of how much you like the song, I think it's a good time to talk ratings.
Do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me?
Out of 5 stars in the context of Fugazi's catalog, what do you think you would rate Cashout?
Oh, I think this. I mean, for me, this song is definitely a 5. I love the production. We didn't talk about this, but I think it actually is a cool bridge to the sound that ultimately the Evens would kind of use more.
Yeah, agreed.
I feel like you like after you hear the Evens and you go back and listen to Cashout, you're like, oh, I can totally see that. It's like when you see a picture of your dad and you're like, that's definitely my dad. Yeah. And so yeah, it's a cool transition, I think, between that sound. So for me, this song really does a lot. It's not the song, like if you ask for 100 Fugazi scholars what their favorite 10 songs are or something, this song might not make it onto the list of those, but for me, this is one of my favorite songs.
Huge rating. I think
it's got a good balance.
I think for me, it's not quite top tier. I do still really like it for all the reasons we discussed. I'm going to go ahead and award it 4 of my stars. Still an amazing song. If we ever get back into playing music together, maybe we'll cover this one. Attempt to do it justice.
We've geographically managed to get probably the closest we've ever lived together, except for the time that we lived in the same house. Do you remember, I was thinking about this, I was back in Williamsburg not last Christmas, but the Christmas before, and I did that walk between our house and the university center that felt like an eternity back then. Like it was a really far walk.
Yeah.
It's not very far. It's like a 2-minute walk. Which is kind of funny because we used to push our equipment down the street.
Oh my God. Yeah, you're right.
And like literally roll it
on gurneys or something like, yeah, skateboards, right.
Yeah. We used to like put you had those bag end, 1x12s or 1x10s?
1x15s. I'm
1x15s.
I'm sitting 4 feet from those bad boys at the moment. Yeah. Good speakers.
Yeah, you had those speaker cabs and they stacked, and then we put the head on top, and I had that little 2x12 Marshall, and yeah, that was super fun, man.
Something I still remember.
Zach Morrissey.
Yeah, what I still remember from the old band days, loading in and out gear is like you have a real talent for sort of schmoozing. I mean, don't take that the wrong way, but it is what it is. And like,
I like people.
Yeah, exactly. At one point, like we were coming back from a show, I think, and we sort of like pulled the car into an area we weren't supposed to be in. sort of started unloading. This cop rolls up and he's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. You guys have to. So you start just talking to this guy and you're like, oh, sorry about that. Like, do you know if there's a good place? In the meantime, like I'm hustling, like loading in all the speakers. Like I think we brought our PA on that occasion, like our own PA. I'm just like humping this stuff back and forth while you're sort of talking to the cop. And so by the time you were finished talking to him, it was done. It was a fait accompli. And we're like, well, thank you, officer. All right. Thanks for being understanding. Be seeing you. So that was a good example of putting that talent to good use.
It's funny. I don't remember that story very well, but I know like all those facts are true because that is exactly what would have happened if that situation had happened. I would have started trying to talk to the cops, and you would have kept loading.
Yeah, it was one of those great unspoken things. Like there was nary a glance between us, but I think we both knew in the moment. Like, here's what's going to happen, and and let's activate this plan.
I love how was a problem, right? It's like parking your car to unload your music. That's how much we love doing it, right?
Right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show and a bit of plugs. I don't know if you have any plugs. Do you want to let listeners know about something that you have coming up or anything like that?
I mean, I think I'll plug I'm doing improv now as you improv theater, which has been kind of hard hit since the COVID stuff started happening. So everyone should go to madeuptheater.com and check out my improv group. We're doing like broadcast via the living room shows every Saturday. So that's kind of fun. And yeah, it's really fun to talk to you about this stuff and take a little trip down memory lane. I'm sure we could do a whole podcast that's just like growing up in rock bands and trying to be cool and, trying to figure out what was going on. But I think universally, like everyone that, went through that in that period of time in that area just has this special place in their heart for Fugazi that will probably always be there and probably not be understood by a lot of the people that they come across in the rest of their life. Like when they move away or, try to talk to people who weren't there, it just doesn't have the same gravity that I feel like when you meet someone who, grew up at that time period in that area and you talk about Fugazi, you just know, what they're talking about.
Well said.
So,
which is for me a lot of the point of doing this podcast. Like, hey, just talking to people about Fugazi. It's a good time. And you are no exception, Jay. So thank you for being on the show. And listeners, as for me, I just have the same plugs as usual. You can reach me at fugaziA2Z@gmail.com, and you can join the Facebook group, The Alphabetical Fugazi. Comment on the threads for each show if we missed anything that you think is really worth saying about today's song. And I hope you'll join me for the next episode of the show when we will be discussing Cassavetes. Until then, keep your eyes open.